Across the globe, certain regions seem to harbor an unusual atmospheric unrest. These are places where unexplained lights frequently appear, and stories of mysterious encounters are passed down through generations. While their positions are generally marked on maps by triangulating nearby towns, their true identities are forged not by geography, but by the tales they inspire. One such locale lies in the heart of Scotland, a rural expanse where sightings occur with startling regularity. Known as the Falkirk Triangle, it has earned a reputation as the United Kingdom's most active UFO hotspot. It's a place where the mundane intersects with the extraordinary. Throughout human history, accounts of enigmatic beings traversing our skies in strange and seemingly impossible vehicles are plentiful. From carvings on ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics to detailed written testimonies in medieval manuscripts, the phenomenon of unidentified flying objects is far from a modern invention. However, it wasn't until the mid-1940s that the concept of alien visitors arriving on Earth became firmly embedded in the global consciousness. During this era, a surge of high-profile sightings of alleged extraterrestrial craft swept across North America, with one particular incident capturing worldwide attention. On the bright summer afternoon of June 24, 1947, American businessman Kenneth Arnold was piloting his private aircraft over the rugged wilderness of Washington state. As he approached the small mountain town of Mineral, Arnold observed a formation of unusual objects about 25 miles to his left, near the tower and peak of Mount Rainier. He counted 9 identical craft, each moving in sequence at extraordinary speed, exhibiting none of the familiar characteristics of conventional aircraft of the time. When Arnold later recounted his experience to newspaper reporters, he likened the object's movement to a saucer skipping across water. Although his description referred only to their motion and not their physical form, the phrase flying saucer immediately took hold in the press and became permanently associated with any unexplained aerial object. Following the publicity surrounding Arnold's sighting, reports of flying saucers dramatically increased and have continued to intrigue, divide, and fascinate the public ever since. As sightings multiplied, the United States government authorized a series of official military investigations into the growing phenomenon. Other administrations soon followed suit, with the British government launching its own inquiry in the 1950s. Early analyses suggested that sightings tended to cluster near major cities, particularly around Manchester and Liverpool. Over time, however, researchers observed that 2 rural areas were generating far more reports than even the busiest metropolitan centers. One was the countryside surrounding the Wiltshire Pennon of Warminster, a location still associated with unexplained events today. The other was a broad swath of central Scotland, stretching from Stirling in the north to Glasgow and Edinburgh in the south. Although named after Falkirk, the largest settlement in the area, most recorded incidents have occurred near the much smaller town of Bonnybridge. Since the 1970s, the Falkirk Triangle has experienced multiple waves of unusual activity. However, it was a spate of high-profile incidents some 20 years later that finally brought the region's mysteries to the full attention of the national media. In the summer of 1989, crews from the Central Scottish Fire Brigade were dispatched to a house fire near the village of Shield Hill. After the blaze was brought under control, the firefighters were damping down the remains when they noticed something peculiar. Hovering a few meters above Loch nearby was a glowing red object. At first, they assumed it was a police helicopter. Yet, as they watched, the strangeness became apparent. The object made no sound, showed no rotor wash, and hung perfectly still. Without warning, it moved, accelerating until it shot directly over their heads. Startled, several firefighters instinctively ducked as it flashed past. Minutes later, a second object appeared over the loch, this one emitting a white light. It too hovered motionless as if observing, before racing across the water and again passing low over the crew. By now, the men were unnerved. They began packing their gear to leave, only for a third light to manifest and perform another swift flyover. Back at the station that night, officers made inquiries. Police and air traffic control reported no helicopters, military exercises, or civilian flights operating near Shield Hill at the time. To the best of official knowledge, the local airspace had been clear. For a while, the encounter remained a curious yet humorous story traded among the area's emergency services, the night the loch lights buzzed the fire crews. Its meaning, however, would shift with hindsight. 3 years later, a spate of strange incidents in the same stretch of central Scotland would draw national attention, transforming an odd campfire tale into an early marker of a much larger mystery. When later witnesses described lights that hovered in silence, then streaked away at startling speed, firefighters who had tackled the Shield Hill blaze found that the memories of that night came flooding back. Whatever they had seen over Loch Leven that summer evening, red, white, and eerily silent, it had not behaved like any aircraft they had ever seen, and it had not been alone. In January 1992, a man from Bonnybridge named James Walker was driving home from work along a narrow country lane that wound through the quiet fields. The night was cold, the road deserted. As he followed the twisting track, he became aware of a cluster of lights moving in the sky ahead. They were both red and white, shifting and darting above the road in an almost playful manner. Curious, Walker slowed his car and watched. For several moments, the lights appeared to dance in no particular pattern. Then, with deliberate precision, they formed into 2 neat rows. Slowly, the formation began to advance up the road towards his position. It was then that Walker realized the lights were not independent objects at all. They were mounted on the underside of something far larger. The craft revealed itself as it drew closer, a vast triangular-shaped vessel, its lights tracing the edges of a pronounced V-shaped fuselage. It moved at a steady, deliberate pace directly above the road and passed over the roof of Walker's stationary car in total silence. There was no engine noise, no rush of displaced air, nothing but the strange stillness of the moment. Within seconds, the craft accelerated sharply and disappeared into the night sky. Several weeks later, in late March, another encounter took place only a short distance from Walker's sighting. That evening, Isabella Slodgett was walking home with her children, Stephen and Carol, along a footpath linking Hoglan and Bonnybridge. Dusk was settling over the fields when Stephen suddenly pointed upwards and asked his mother about a pale blue light hovering in the darkening sky. Isabella looked to where he was pointing. The light grew larger as it descended, revealing itself as a spherical craft encircled by a ring of bright blue lights. It passed slowly over their heads, continuing to lose altitude until it vanished behind a nearby copse of trees. At Stephen's insistence, the family made their way towards the spot, eventually finding a clearing where the object had come to rest. They watched in disbelief as a section of the craft's side opened, spilling an intense blue light across the clearing. There was a pause. Then a loud guttural howl erupted from within, echoing through the trees. Instantly, all 3 witnesses were gripped by an overwhelming sense of fear. Without discussion, they turned and fled back towards their home, hearts pounding in their chests. When Isabella reported the incident to Central Scotland Police, the officers listened sympathetically, but admitted they had little idea how to investigate such a claim. This was, however, only the beginning. In the weeks and months that followed, the Falkirk Triangle would see a surge of similar reports, strange lights, unidentified craft, and encounters that would deepen the region's reputation as the UK's most active UFO hotspot. One evening the following August, Gary Wood and Colin Wright were driving along the A70 from Edinburgh towards the small village of Tarbrax. The night was moonless. The road ahead was shrouded in darkness, and they had not seen another vehicle for some time when a light appeared in the distance. Assuming it was an oncoming car, Wood dipped his headlights and eased back on the accelerator. But as the glow ahead intensified, they realized something was wrong. There was only a single light, and it was far brighter than any headlamp. It grew rapidly, bearing down on them until it filled their view. Just as a collision seemed inevitable, a blinding flash erupted, flooding the car with heat and dazzling brightness. The world vanished into darkness. When the two men opened their eyes, they were disoriented. Two things were immediately apparent. First, the car was no longer facing in the direction of Tarbrax. It had somehow turned a full 180 degrees and now pointed back towards Edinburgh. Second, the dashboard clock showed that 2 hours had passed since they had last checked it, though to them it felt as if only seconds had slipped by. Fearing they might have been involved in an accident that had knocked them unconscious, they climbed out to inspect the vehicle. There was no sign of any damage, no dents, no debris, nothing to suggest a collision. The only anomaly was their inexplicable change in direction. Shaken, they turned the car around once more and continued on their journey. The following morning, they reported the incident to police, who were at a loss as to how such an event should be recorded. In the days and weeks that followed, both Wood and Wright began experiencing disturbing flashbacks, fleeting images, sensations, and impressions that seemed to belong to the 2 missing hours they could not consciously explain. Fragmented and unclear, these glimpses were enough to leave them deeply unsettled. The strange encounter on the A70 would go on to become one of the most discussed UFO incidents in Scotland, not merely for the sighting itself, but for those 2 unaccounted hours. Whatever happened in that gap would soon begin to surface piece by piece, revealing a story far stranger than either man could have imagined. Over time, both men began to experience disturbing memories. Chief among them were horrifying glimpses of uncanny beings who had removed them from the car and interacted with them inside a strange, unnatural environment which felt cold, sterile, and devoid of familiarity. Gary Wood, a paramedic by profession, confided in colleagues for advice on stopping the visions that intruded on his sleep and during the day, which occurred without warning. Several recommended hypnosis, emphasizing that the men arranged separate sessions so that their accounts could not influence one another. After some hesitation, Wood and Wright agreed and booked appointments with different practitioners. Under hypnosis, each man described the same sequence. They recalled being drawn from Wood's vehicle without physical contact and carried somehow into a dark craft, the source of the blinding light. The interior seemed featureless, with a dim, diffused glow that revealed little. They were strapped to cold metal tables, while shadowy figures conducted painful examinations. Instruments pressed and pierced. Searing, stabbing sensations spread beneath the skin. The beings did not speak aloud. Instead, their voices arrived in the mind. Through this telepathic exchange, the entities claimed they were not visitors from afar, but long-present observers already on Earth and studying humanity's behavior. They offered no explanation of purpose and gave no reassurance, only a sense of clinical interest. When the procedures ended, both men were rendered unconscious. They came to in the car, facing the wrong way on the A70, chilled and frightened, with no memory of how they had turned or why 2 hours had vanished. The authorities had listened to their account, but skepticism hardened into ridicule. Seeking an independent investigation, the pair volunteered for polygraph tests. Both men passed, results consistent with the belief that what surfaced in hypnosis was a true account of events during the missing hours as they remembered them. However unsettling their testimony, it was not the last word. The Falkirk Triangle would soon produce further incidents, some stranger, some darker, and these stories would become one thread in a widening tapestry of claims. Before the surge of sightings reported to the authorities in the early 1990s, there had been a similar wave of activity during the late 1970s. Among the most infamous of these, and one of the most extraordinary UFO cases in the history of the British Isles, is the Detchmont Law incident, named for the stretch of woodland in which it occurred. On the morning of November 9, 1979, forestry worker Robert Taylor set out for the Detchmont area to carry out routine coppicing and maintenance. Traveling from Edinburgh along the M8, he parked his vehicle near Livingston, collected his equipment, and entered the woods. He had not gone far when he came upon something entirely unexpected. A metallic object hovering in a small clearing no more than 12 feet above the ground. Taylor later described the craft as spherical, roughly 20 feet in diameter, and seemingly supported by several small propeller-like devices projecting from its hull. Intrigued, he placed his tools on the ground and began walking towards it. Almost at once, two smaller spheres dropped from the underside of the larger craft, landing heavily on the forest floor. These smaller objects were covered in short, spike-like protrusions reminiscent of a wartime sea mine. Without pause, they began rolling towards Taylor, splitting apart to approach from either side as if to flank him. Fearing the worst, Taylor turned to run, but the rolling devices reached him in seconds, colliding with his legs and knocking him to the ground. As he struggled, the spiked spheres rolled up and down his legs, tearing his trousers and cutting into the flesh beneath. In the midst of the struggle, the objects began to haul him backwards across the ground towards the hovering craft. He kicked and twisted, but their grip didn't loosen. This continued for several minutes, during which Taylor could feel himself being inexorably dragged closer. Then, without warning, a loud hissing filled the clearing, accompanied by a powerful smell of burning. Overwhelmed, Taylor lost consciousness. What followed after Taylor lost consciousness remains one of the great mysteries of the Dechmont Law case, pieced together only after he awoke and tried to make sense of his surroundings. When he fully regained consciousness, he realized that around 20 minutes had passed. The clearing was now silent, and the strange objects had vanished without a trace. Looking down, he saw the damage left behind. His trousers were torn and blood-stained, the fabric ripped by a series of cuts along his legs where the spiked spheres had pierced his skin. It had taken some time for him to gather the strength to stand. Eventually, he stumbled back towards his parked vehicle, but quickly decided he was far too disoriented to drive. Abandoning the vehicle, he set off on foot for Livingston. By the time he reached the town, exhaustion overcame him and he collapsed. He was taken to the local hospital for treatment. When his wife arrived, the sight shocked her. Her husband was pale, incoherent, and muttering about having been attacked. Police officers attending the hospital found his account strange, but his injuries and shredded clothing were undeniable. Concerned, they referred the matter to senior officers. Detectives and scenes of crime personnel were dispatched to Dechmont Law, where they examined both Taylor's vehicle and the clearing in which the incident had occurred. On the forest floor, they found a series of unusual indentations, as if heavy machinery with an unfamiliar configuration had moved through the area. These were measured, photographed, and logged. Officially, the incident was recorded as an assault by unknown persons in a remote area, though the investigation was eventually closed due to lack of any further evidence. The Robert Taylor case, however, did not fade quietly. News of the bizarre encounter spread quickly, attracting national media coverage and public speculation. Questions were raised about what exactly had happened to the forestry worker that November morning, questions which remain unanswered to this day. As a former soldier with no history of mental illness, Robert Taylor was regarded as a credible witness, and the physical evidence at the scene appeared to support his account. When journalists visited Dechmont Law, they located the clearing and noted more than 40 unusual indentations pressed deep into the ground. Surrounded by dense woodland with no sign of any route having been cleared from the road, it seemed implausible that a large vehicle could have reached the site, unless, as Taylor insisted, it had descended from the sky. While much of the public appeared to believe his story, officials in higher office were more skeptical. Some suggested the burning smell he reported might have been the result of a sudden stroke, temporarily distorting his perception of reality. Others argued that his experience could have been caused by a rare atmospheric or weather phenomenon. The weather around Livingston had been poor on the morning of the incident, prompting speculation that Taylor had been close to a lightning strike. Such an event, they theorized, could have triggered a panic reaction, causing him to run through the trees, tear his clothing, and possibly sustain a concussion, all without any involvement of a craft or mechanical device. None of these theories carried any weight with those who knew him personally. Friends, family, and colleagues considered him steady, practical, and not prone to exaggeration. Taylor himself never altered his account, maintaining until his death in 2007 that what he had encountered in the clearing was exactly as he had described, a strange hovering object with two spiked spheres which had attacked and dragged him, leaving physical marks on both his body and the ground. He did, however, consider the possibility that these visions might have been the result of experiencing either a mini-stroke or epileptic seizure at the time. Despite never having previously suffered from either condition, the incidents that have taken place within the Falkirk Triangle over the past 50 years stand out from UFO reports recorded elsewhere in the United Kingdom. Across Britain, most sightings are ultimately classified by investigators as encounters of either the first or the second kind. In such cases, witnesses typically report seeing an unidentified craft, and in some instances, there may be physical evidence left at the scene that appears to support their accounts. By contrast, a strikingly high proportion of cases from the Falkirk Triangle fall into the category of the third kind. Here, witnesses not only report seeing the craft, and in some cases discovering lasting traces of its presence, but also claim to have interacted in some way with its occupants. Public concern in the area has at times been so strong that residents have repeatedly written to successive prime ministers, urging the release of any official information the government might hold on the incidents taking place in their region. The British government's official study into UFO activity came to an end in 2005, and its findings were later released to the public. These included numerous reports from central Scotland, many of which were written off as sightings of celestial bodies, misinterpretations of natural phenomena, or optical illusions brought about by weather and lighting conditions. Skeptics also point out that the skies above the Falkirk Triangle are among the busiest in Europe. Alongside several smaller airfields, there are major international airports at Glasgow and Edinburgh. Most flights crossing the UK from America into mainland Europe pass over Scotland, meaning residents in this part of the country are more likely to see unusual lights in the night sky than many others. In addition, there are two military airfields situated just outside the Falkirk Triangle, RAF Leckers and RAF Kirknewton. Both are home to military aircraft that may be unfamiliar to most civilians and operate frequently during the hours of darkness. These bases also receive occasional visits from foreign military and organizational aircraft, whose appearance may be wholly unknown to local observers and could easily be mistaken for something otherworldly. Despite these somewhat plausible explanations, many in Scotland remain unconvinced. Some believe the region has been visited by extraterrestrials for centuries. Supporters of this view often point to the ancient stone circles found on the islands of Lewis and Orkney, thought to be as much as 5,000 years old. Much like the more famous Stonehenge, these formations are believed by some to have served as landing markers, deliberately constructed to guide alien craft to ground. And the theory does not end there. Advocates also cite the 15th century Rosslyn Chapel in Edinburgh, renowned for its intricate and mysterious carvings. Among these are designs that appear to depict the double helix structure of human DNA, a concept completely unknown at the time, alongside images identified as crops from far-flung parts of the world, patterns resembling coded messages, and glyphs which contain meanings that have never been deciphered. Those who subscribe to the theory argue that such advanced knowledge could only have been passed to the people of the time by travelers who had journeyed across the globe, or perhaps by visitors from far beyond it. Over the past 5 decades, reports from within the Falkirk Triangle have revealed recurring details that have changed little over time. Witnesses frequently describe a combination of red and white lights positioned along the sides of the craft they have seen. Many accounts also mention flying objects with no visible means of propulsion and no windows for a crew. Often described as having a triangular or V-shaped body, this is in marked contrast to reports from other parts of the world where witnesses more commonly describe cylindrical or spherical craft. Today, the Falkirk Triangle continues to generate between 45 and 60 new UFO sightings each year from both residents and visitors to the area. Just why alleged extraterrestrial visitors might favor this particular region of the United Kingdom remains an unanswered question. Yet with incidents showing no sign of slowing down, Some believe it is only a matter of time before the mystery is finally solved.